Hey, welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, and if you are here right now, I want you to know something. You are already doing something really smart. You're not just studying grammar rules or memorizing word lists. You're training your ears to understand real English, the kind people actually speak, the kind that doesn't always come with clear, obvious signals. And that is exactly what today's episode is all about. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation with a native English speaker and you understood every single word they said, but you still weren't sure what they actually meant? Like, maybe they said something like, you know, it might be worth thinking about getting there a bit earlier. And you thought, okay. Is that just a random thought? Are they telling me something? Are they suggesting I do something? And you weren't sure. You just nodded and smiled and hoped for the best. If that has ever happened to you, you are in exactly the right place today. Because what that person was doing, what millions of English speakers do every single day, is expressing a suggestion indirectly. They weren't saying, you should get there earlier. They weren't saying, I recommend arriving early. They wrapped it up in softer, more natural-sounding language, and they trusted you to catch the meaning underneath. And honestly, that's one of the hardest things to do when you're learning English. Not because the words are complicated, but because the signals are hidden. They're subtle. They're woven into normal, everyday conversation. So today, we're going to fix that. We're going to train your ears to catch those signals. We are going to listen to real conversations, real-life situations, and I'm going to walk you through what's happening under the surface of what people are saying. By the end of this episode, you won't just understand indirect suggestions when you hear them. You'll feel them. And that is a completely different level of fluency. And it's something I really want for you. Now, before we dive in, I want to be very clear about what an indirect suggestion is, because I think some people confuse it with hinting or being passive-aggressive. It's not that. In English, especially in British English, American English, Australian English, across all varieties, it is extremely common and completely normal to soften suggestions. People do it to be polite. They do it to avoid sounding bossy or pushy. They do it to give you the feeling that you still have a choice. It's a sign of respect, actually. When someone says, have you ever thought about trying a different approach? They're not hiding something. They're just being considerate. They're packaging their advice in a way that feels gentle and kind, rather than forceful and direct. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you know what to listen for, once you recognize the patterns, these indirect suggestions become easy to catch. You start hearing them everywhere. In movies, in podcasts, in meetings, in casual chats with friends, they're all around you. You just need the right training to tune in to them. All right, let's start. I want you to imagine a scene. You are going to listen to a short conversation, and then I'm going to break it down for you. I want you to really listen, not just for the words, but for the feeling. Ready? Here we go. Maya and her friend Daniel are sitting together in a small cafe. Maya has just started a new job, and she's been telling Daniel how stressed she's been feeling. She mentions that she's been skipping lunch every day because she's too busy. Daniel listens, nods, and then says, wow, that sounds like a lot. I don't know. It might actually help to even just step outside for 10 minutes. Sometimes a little air makes a huge difference. Now, here's the question. Did Daniel give Maya a suggestion? Yes, absolutely he did. But did he say, you should go outside? No. Did he say, I'm advising you to take a break? No. He said, it might actually help to even just step outside. That phrase, it might help, is doing a lot of work there. It's soft. It's gentle. It leaves the decision completely in Maya's hands. Daniel is saying, I have an idea for you, but I'm not forcing anything. It's just a thought. And notice he also said, I don't know, at the beginning. That might seem strange, right? If Daniel has an idea, why does he say, I don't know? It's because, in English, saying I don't know at the start of a suggestion is a way of making it feel less confident, less certain, less like a command and more like a genuine, humble idea. It's a softener, a social tool. It tells the listener, this is just a thought from me, not a lecture. So in that one short exchange, we had two indirect suggestion signals working together. I don't know, plus it might help. And together, they made Daniel's suggestion feel warm and caring, not pushy or preachy. Let's sit with that for a second, because that's the kind of nuance that separates intermediate English from truly fluent English. Now let's try another one. Same characters, a little later in the conversation. Maya mentions that she's been having trouble sleeping. She lies awake thinking about work. Daniel listens carefully and then says, oh, that's rough. Have you ever tried writing things down before bed? Like, just kind of dumping your thoughts onto paper? I've heard it can help your brain relax. Okay. So there's the suggestion. Have you ever tried writing things down before bed? This is one of the most classic indirect suggestion patterns in English. Have you ever tried? It sounds like a question. It's structured like a question, but it functions as a suggestion. What Daniel is really saying is, try writing things down before bed. But he's wrapped it in question form, which makes it feel much softer, much more like an invitation than a command. And then, after the suggestion, he added, I've heard it can help. Notice that. He didn't say, I know it will help. He said, I've heard. This is distancing language. He's putting space between himself and the advice, so it doesn't feel like he's telling Maya what to do. He's just passing along something he's come across. Something that might be useful. No pressure. These are the kinds of micro-signals that you need to start catching. And I promise you, as we keep going through this episode, your ears are going to get better and better at picking them up. Because listening is a skill, just like any other. The more you practice, the sharper you get. And you're practicing right now, this very moment. Let's move into a completely different context now. A workplace setting. Because indirect suggestions are everywhere in professional environments, maybe even more so than in casual conversation. When people are at work, they're often very conscious of hierarchy, of feelings, of how their words might land. So they tend to be especially careful about how they phrase things. Imagine this. Priya is a team leader at a small marketing agency. Her colleague James has been putting together a presentation for a new client, and Priya has just reviewed it. She thinks the introduction is a bit too long and not engaging enough. She wants to give James feedback without making him feel bad or defensive. So she sits down with him and says, James, I really like where this is going. The data in the middle section is really solid. I was just wondering, and feel free to totally ignore this if you disagree, but do you think the opening could maybe grab the audience a little faster? Like, maybe lead with something punchy right from the start? Just a thought. Okay. Wow. There is so much happening in that one little piece of dialogue. Let's take it apart together. First, Priya started with something positive. I really like where this is going. This is called a compliment sandwich in English, and it's extremely common when giving indirect suggestions or feedback. You start with something good, then you slip in the suggestion, then you often end with something encouraging or positive. It makes the suggestion feel balanced, not like an attack. Then she said, I was just wondering. This is beautiful. I was just wondering is one of the most useful indirect suggestion phrases in the English language. It signals that what's coming is a gentle thought, not a firm recommendation. The word just makes it even softer. Just minimizes things in English. It makes ideas seem smaller, lighter, less of a big deal. Then came, feel free to totally ignore this if you disagree. That line is fascinating. Priya is actually giving James permission to reject her suggestion before she's even fully made it. She's giving him an exit, an escape route, so that he never feels trapped or pressured. This is extremely polite English, and it's very natural in workplace conversations among colleagues who respect each other. Then, the actual suggestion. Do you think the opening could maybe grab the audience a little faster? Again, structured as a question, not a statement, not a command, a question. And with the word maybe in there, making it even less certain, even more open-ended. And then she wrapped it all up with, just a thought. 3 words that do enormous work. Just a thought is a closing signal in English that tells the listener, this was only my idea. It's not an order. You're completely free to decide for yourself. It's a gentle bow out after a suggestion. It's polite. It's humble. It's friendly. So let's count the indirect suggestion signals in Priya's speech. 1. Compliment first. 2. I was just wondering. 3. Feel free to ignore this. 4. Question form instead of statement. 5. Maybe. 6. Just a thought. 6 signals. In one paragraph of speech. And if you weren't trained to catch them, you might hear all of that and just think, oh, she's not sure about the presentation. But actually, she had a very clear, specific suggestion. She just delivered it very, very carefully. This is what fluent English sounds like in real life. It's layered, it's thoughtful, and it rewards listeners who know how to tune in. Let's take a short moment here. I want you to do something. Think about the last time someone gave you a suggestion or some kind of advice. Maybe it was a friend, a teacher, a colleague, someone online. And think about how they said it. Was it direct? Did they say, you should do this? Or was it indirect? Did they wrap it in softer language? And if it was indirect, can you now identify some of the signals they used? Did they say, have you thought about? Did they say, it might be worth? Did they say, I was just wondering? Take a moment. Really think about it. Because here's the thing. Part of becoming fluent in English isn't just about understanding new words. It's about looking back at conversations you've already had and seeing them differently, with new ears, with more understanding. That's when real progress happens. That's when things click. Okay, let's keep going. I want to take you into a completely different kind of situation. Now, a family setting. Because the way families talk to each other is very different from the way colleagues or friends do. There's more warmth, often more directness, but still, especially between adults, there are lots of indirect suggestions. Imagine this. Tom is in his late 30s. He's visiting his mum, Linda, for the weekend. Tom has recently gone through a breakup, and Linda can see that he hasn't been taking great care of himself. He looks tired. He's lost some weight. She's worried, but she doesn't want to push him or make him feel worse. So over dinner she says, "Tom, I made your favorite, by the way. I thought it might be nice for you to have a proper home-cooked meal. You know, I always think it does something for the soul, eaten well. I don't know. Maybe it's worth trying to do a little more of that for yourself at home. Even something simple. You know, whatever works for you." Let's listen to that again in our minds. Linda didn't say, "Tom, you're not eating well enough. You need to take better care of yourself." She didn't lecture him. She didn't make it about what he was doing wrong. She made it about warmth and care. She cooked his favorite. She wrapped the suggestion inside the experience of the meal itself. Then she said, "I always think it does something for the soul, eating well." She shared her own general belief, not a criticism of Tom. And then, almost as an aside, she slipped in, "Maybe it's worth trying to do a little more of that for yourself at home." The phrase, "it's worth trying," is a classic indirect suggestion in English. It suggests value without demanding action. Worth trying. Worth considering. Worth thinking about. These are all very gentle ways of pointing someone toward something. And then she ended with, "Whatever works for you," which is such a loving way to close a suggestion. It hands the power back to Tom completely. It says, "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just sharing a thought, and whatever you decide is fine." That's indirect suggestion at its warmest and most human. Now, something I want you to notice across all these examples we've been looking at is that the indirect suggestions are almost never standalone. They're almost always wrapped in other language. There's warm-up language before them and closing language after them. Real English speakers build a whole little cushion of words around their suggestions, and the suggestion itself is somewhere in the middle. So when you're listening, you need to stay alert through the whole thing, not just catch one phrase and stop listening. Think of it like this. If someone wraps a gift, the gift is what matters, but you still have to deal with all the wrapping paper first. Indirect suggestions are the gift. The warm-up and the closing language is the wrapping paper. And in English, there's often a lot of wrapping paper. Let's move now into a scenario that I think a lot of you will find really relatable. A student and a teacher. Or a student and a tutor. Someone in an educational setting. Because teachers often need to give suggestions without crushing a student's confidence, and they get very creative with indirect language. Imagine this. Sophie is a university student studying English literature. She's handed in an essay, and her tutor, Professor Hammond, is giving her feedback in a one-to-one meeting. Professor Hammond says, "Sophie, I found this really engaging. Your argument in the first half is particularly well developed. You've clearly read widely, and you're thinking deeply about the texts. I think what could really elevate this even further, and this is just my reading of it, is if the conclusion maybe spent a bit more time tying together the different threads you've raised earlier. At the moment it feels a little bit like it ends quite quickly, and I think there's more you could say. But again, this is just one perspective. You know your essay best. There's so much richness there. Let's pull it apart slowly. I found this really engaging. Positive opener. We've seen this before. It sets a good tone. It tells Sophie her work is valued. I think what could really elevate this even further The word could is crucial here. Not should, not must. Could. Could implies possibility, not obligation. Elevate is also a very positive word. Professor Hammond isn't saying the essay has a problem. She's saying there's a way to make something already good even better. That's a very different emotional message. And this is just my reading of it. There's that distancing language again. Professor Hammond is making her suggestion feel subjective, personal, one opinion among many possible opinions. She's not presenting herself as the absolute authority. She's saying, this is how I see it. Others might see it differently. That makes the feedback feel much safer to receive. Is if the conclusion maybe spent a bit more time. Again, maybe. That one word softens everything around it. Without maybe, this would feel like a firm correction. With maybe, it becomes a gentle possibility. At the moment, it feels a little bit like it ends quite quickly. The phrase a little bit is doing tremendous work here. A little bit minimizes. It says, this isn't a huge problem. It's a small thing, something slight. And feels like is again subjective language. Not, it ends too quickly. It feels like it ends quite quickly. Feelings can be wrong. Feelings are just impressions. Professor Hammond is being very careful not to state anything as absolute. I think there's more you could say. Not, you need to say more. I think there's more you could say. That's an invitation, an encouragement, not a correction. But again, this is just one perspective. You know your essay best. And Professor Hammond closes by handing full authority back to Sophie. You know your essay best. That is such a powerful thing to say at the end of feedback. It restores the student's confidence and autonomy completely. When you can hear all of these signals in real time, in a real conversation, without stopping to think about them consciously, that's when you've reached a new level of listening fluency, and I want you to know that level is absolutely within reach for you. It takes practice, and it takes exposure, and that's exactly what you're getting right now. Let me give you a few more of the most common indirect suggestion phrases in English, and I want to give you real examples for each one, so they land in your memory as living language, not just as grammar patterns on a list. The first one is, have you considered? This one is very common in professional and academic settings. For example, imagine two friends are talking about how to deal with a difficult housemate situation. One friend says, have you considered just having a calm conversation with her about it? Sometimes people don't realize how their habits affect others. Have you considered invites reflection. It's not pushing. It's asking whether the person has thought about something, and if they haven't, the implication is that maybe it would be a good idea to think about it. It's a very respectful phrase because it treats the listener as someone capable of making their own decisions once they have more information to consider. The second phrase is, it might be worth. This one is extremely versatile. You'll hear it in all kinds of situations. For example, imagine a personal trainer talking to a client who's been complaining about knee pain during runs. The trainer says, it might be worth getting that checked out by a physio before we increase the intensity, just to be safe. It might be worth suggests value without pressure. It's worth it, meaning it would pay off, it would be beneficial. But might keeps it all in the realm of possibility, not certainty. And then, just to be safe, is a wonderful little softener at the end. It frames the suggestion as protective, careful, sensible, not alarming. The third one is, you might want to think about. This is slightly more personal than it might be worth, because it speaks directly to the listener with you, but it's still very soft. For example, imagine a manager talking to a team member about an upcoming project deadline. The manager says, "You might want to think about how you're going to distribute the tasks across the week. It's a tight turnaround." "You might want to think about" is almost asking, "Have you thought about this?" It nudges the person toward a specific action, thinking about task distribution, without telling them exactly what to do. It respects their intelligence and their autonomy. The fourth phrase is, "What if you?" This one is brilliant because it sounds almost playful. It introduces a suggestion in the form of a hypothetical. For example, imagine two business partners brainstorming about their social media strategy. One says, "What if you started posting shorter videos for a while, just to see how the engagement looks?" "What if" takes the suggestion into imagination. It's like saying, "Let's explore this possibility together." Not "I'm telling you what you should do." It creates a collaborative feeling rather than a top-down advice dynamic. The fifth and final phrase I want to give you today is, "I was thinking, maybe." This one is extremely conversational and warm. It's the kind of thing friends and family say to each other. For example, imagine a couple planning their holiday. One partner says, "I was thinking, maybe we could try somewhere a little more quiet this year, like less touristy, just for a change." "I was thinking" signals that this has been on the speaker's mind. It adds a personal, reflective quality, and maybe immediately softens whatever comes next. Together, "I was thinking, maybe" is one of the most natural-sounding ways to introduce a suggestion in everyday English. It feels real. It feels human. Because it is. Before we go any further, I want to take a little detour into something that I think will really deepen your understanding. Because we've been talking about what indirect suggestions sound like, but I haven't yet talked much about why they feel the way they do when you hear them. And I think understanding the why actually makes the what much easier to catch. When a native English speaker uses indirect language to make a suggestion, there's an unspoken contract happening between them and the listener. The speaker is essentially saying, "I have a thought that could help you, but I respect you too much to just tell you what to do. I'm going to offer this gently, and I trust you to take it or leave it." And the listener's job is to receive that offer gracefully, which usually means acknowledging it in some way, whether they agree with it or not. This social contract is really important to understand, because once you feel it, not just know it intellectually but actually feel it, the indirect language stops being confusing and starts being warm. It stops feeling like a puzzle you have to decode and starts feeling like a kindness being offered. Think about the opposite. Think about how it feels when someone gives advice in a very blunt, direct way. "You should eat better." "You need to exercise more." "You have to update your CV." Even when those things are true, even when the person saying them genuinely cares about you, there's something about the directness that can feel a little uncomfortable. It can feel like a judgment, like someone saying, "I see a problem with you, and I'm going to tell you how to fix it." Indirect suggestions sidestep all of that. They say, "I see a possibility for you, and I'm going to place it gently in front of you, and let you pick it up if you want to. There's no judgment in that. There's no hierarchy. There's just caring, wrapped in language that respects the other person's independence. And honestly, once you understand that, you'll not only catch indirect suggestions better, you'll appreciate them more. You'll recognize them for what they are. Small acts of emotional intelligence, little moments of consideration for another person's feelings, and that is a very beautiful thing to notice in a language. Okay. Now, let me also take a moment to talk about tone, because tone is incredibly important when it comes to indirect suggestions. Sometimes the same phrase can mean very different things depending on how it's delivered. And as a listener, you need to pay attention to tone alongside the words themselves. For example, imagine someone saying, "Have you thought about asking for help?" in two different ways. The first way, warm voice, slow pace, gentle. It lands as care, as genuine concern, as a kind nudge. The second way, clipped voice, slightly impatient, eyebrows raised. It lands very differently, almost like a criticism. Like, "Why haven't you asked for help already?" Same words, completely different emotional meaning. So when you're listening in English, you can't just track the vocabulary. You have to track the music of the voice, the pace, the warmth or coolness of the tone, the softness or the sharpness of the delivery. This is called prosody in linguistics, but you don't need to know that word. You just need to know that how something is said is part of what's being said. And here's the good news. You already know how to do this. You do it in your own language all the time without thinking. You hear your mother's voice, and you know whether she's pleased or concerned or worried just from the sound of it, before you've even processed the words. This same skill transfers to English. It just takes a bit more practice to activate it in a second language. And the way you practice it is by listening to lots and lots of real English, spoken by real people, in real situations, which is exactly what you're doing right now. Let me give you one more thing to think about before we move into the listening practice. There's a difference between an indirect suggestion and a hint, and I want to make sure you know what it is. A hint is often vague on purpose. It's designed to lead someone toward something without spelling it out, sometimes because the speaker is nervous or uncomfortable saying it directly. A hint can be easy to miss. A hint can be deniable. Like, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by that." An indirect suggestion is different. An indirect suggestion is intentional and clear, but it's delivered softly. The meaning is there. It's just wrapped in considerate language. If you ask the speaker, "Were you suggesting I do something?" they would say, "Yes, actually, I was." They wouldn't deny it. They just chose to say it gently rather than forcefully. So when you're listening for indirect suggestions, you're not looking for hidden meanings or secret messages. You're looking for genuine, clear ideas that have been thoughtfully packaged, and that's a much more comfortable and friendly thing to listen for. It takes the mystery away and replaces it with connection. All right. Now, let's do some active listening practice. I want to give you a conversation to listen to, and I want you to do something. As you listen, I want you to notice every time you think a suggestion might be happening. You don't need to understand everything perfectly. Just focus on the feeling of the language. Does something sound like a gentle nudge? Does someone seem to be pointing toward an idea without stating it directly? Trust your instincts. They're more trained than you think by now. Here is the conversation. Two friends, Clara and Ben, are talking. Clara has been running her own small business selling handmade jewelry, but she's been struggling to get enough customers. Ben listens and then responds. Clara says, "I love making the pieces, I really do, but I feel like I'm just not getting seen. I post on Instagram. I have a website, but I'm not getting many sales. It's starting to feel a bit discouraging." Ben says, "Oh, I get that. That waiting and wondering phase is really hard. I was actually just thinking about this kind of thing for a different friend of mine. Have you ever thought about reaching out to some local shops or boutiques? Like, some of them are really open to featuring local makers, especially handmade stuff. It might be a good way to get in front of people who actually come in to buy things, you know, rather than just scrolling online. I don't know. I feel like the personal touch might do something for your sales, but you know your business way better than I do. Just, if it ever feels like a direction worth exploring." Okay, let's look at that. Let's count the signals together. First, I was actually just thinking about this kind of thing. Ben's warming up. He's connecting his suggestion to something he's already been thinking about, which makes it feel natural and not like he's judging Clara specifically. Second, have you ever thought about reaching out to some local shops? There it is, the classic question form. Have you ever thought about a suggestion dressed up as an inquiry? Third, it might be a good way. Might, not will. Not definitely is. Might, soft, open, possible. Fourth, I don't know. I feel like the personal touch might do something for your sales. He says, I don't know again, that softening opener we talked about earlier. And I feel like is subjective. It's his feeling, his impression. He's not declaring a fact. He's sharing a sense. Fifth, but you know your business way better than I do. He hands authority back to Clara. Completely. Genuinely. And you can feel the warmth in that. Sixth, just, if it ever feels like a direction worth exploring. He's closing with something almost whisper soft. If it ever feels. Not when you do it. Not you should do it. If it ever feels worth exploring. He's making the whole suggestion feel so optional, so free, so pressureless, that Clara can take it or leave it and feel good either way. That, right there, is the sound of a thoughtful, considerate English speaker. And I want to say something more about Ben's response specifically, because there's a quality to it that I think is worth naming. When Ben said, I was actually just thinking about this kind of thing for a different friend of mine, he was doing something very smart socially. He was connecting his suggestion to a separate external situation. He wasn't saying, Clara, I've been thinking about your problem. He was saying, this idea was already in my head for an unrelated reason, and now it seems relevant to you. That's a very natural way to introduce a suggestion without making the other person feel like they've been analyzed or observed. It makes the advice feel accidental, like it just happened to come up, even though it's completely intentional. You'll hear this a lot in English. People say things like, I was just reading about this the other day, or, funny you mentioned that. I was talking to someone about something similar, or, I actually saw something about this recently. It's a way of grounding a suggestion in external evidence or coincidence rather than personal observation, and it makes the suggestion feel less pointed, less targeted, more like something the universe is sending your way, rather than something another person is prescribing for you. Now, let me also flag something that often trips up English learners at this level. When you're listening for indirect suggestions, you might sometimes mistake a genuine question for a suggestion. Not every question is a hidden suggestion. Sometimes people just want to know the answer. So how do you tell the difference? Here's a useful rule of thumb. If the question is about information the speaker genuinely doesn't have and needs, it's probably just a question. For example, "Have you been to that new coffee place?" is probably just curiosity. But if the question contains an implicit idea inside it, one that could improve or change the listener's situation, it's probably a suggestion. "Have you ever tried that new coffee place? I think you'd really love it," is a suggestion. The speaker is nudging you toward trying it. The question is the vehicle. The nudge is the destination. With practice, you'll get better and better at feeling this distinction. It becomes intuitive, automatic, like catching a ball you've thrown 1,000 times. And now that you've trained your ears to recognize it, you will hear it everywhere. You will catch these moments in conversations and podcasts and films that you never used to notice. And catching them is the first step to truly understanding them, and eventually, to using them yourself. Because here's something I want to leave you with before we get to the final section of today's episode. Understanding indirect suggestions isn't just about listening comprehension. It's also about communication style. When you understand why people in English speak this way, you start to understand something deeper about the culture, about values like politeness, respect, personal freedom, and not wanting to impose on others. These are values that are baked into the language itself, especially in British and Australian English, and quite strongly in American English too. Understanding this makes you not just a better listener, but a more culturally aware communicator. And that's a genuinely powerful thing to be. Let me take you into one more scenario before our final practice piece. This one is set in a gym. It's a setting a lot of people know well, or at least recognize, and it's a place where indirect suggestions happen all the time, usually between people who are trying to help without overstepping. Imagine this. Carlos is a regular at a local gym. He's been going for about 6 months, and he's been putting in a lot of effort, but he's feeling frustrated because he's not seeing the results he expected. He mentions this to another regular at the gym, an older woman named Grace, who has clearly been training for many years and looks strong and healthy. Grace doesn't want to seem like she's showing off or being superior, but she genuinely thinks she might have some useful insight for Carlos. She says, "Yeah, that plateau phase is really tough, isn't it? I went through something similar ages ago. I was working really hard and just not moving forward. I ended up kind of accidentally stumbling onto some reading about rest days and recovery. And honestly, it changed everything for me. I don't know. It might not be the same for you, but it might be worth having a look at how much rest you're building in." Sometimes it's counterintuitive, isn't it, that doing less can actually get you more. Let's notice what Grace did there. She didn't say, "You're not taking enough rest days." She didn't say, "You should read about recovery." She started with empathy and shared experience. "I went through something similar." That immediately builds a bridge. It says, "I'm not above you, I've been where you are." Then she introduced the idea of reading about recovery as something she stumbled onto accidentally. I ended up kind of accidentally stumbling onto some reading. This is a lovely rhetorical move. It makes the information feel discovered rather than prescribed, like it found her rather than the other way around. Then, I don't know. It might not be the same for you. She's explicitly acknowledging that her experience may not apply. She's protecting Carlos from feeling like her solution is being pushed onto him. And then, but it might be worth having a look at how much rest you're building in. There's our phrase again. It might be worth. Soft. Possible. Worth a look. Not an order. Just a direction worth glancing toward. And then she closed with a beautiful little observation. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, isn't it, that doing less can actually get you more. The question tag, isn't it, at the end, is doing something very specific in British and General English. It invites agreement. It makes the observation feel like a shared thought rather than a lecture. It's a way of saying, I think this is true. Do you feel the same? And that collaborative feeling turns what could have been advice into a conversation. Carlos walked away from that exchange with something to think about. He wasn't told what to do. He was given a direction, a story, a piece of information, and the space to decide what to do with it. That's indirect suggestion at its finest. Now, I want to spend a moment on something practical. Because all of this listening practice is building toward a real skill, and I want to make sure you have a framework you can actually use when you're out in the world listening to English. Here's what I want you to do. I call it the three-layer approach to listening for indirect suggestions. The first layer is the warm-up layer. This is everything that comes before the actual suggestion. Listen for empathy phrases, personal stories, general observations, or compliments. These are signals that a suggestion might be coming. They're the speaker preparing the ground. The second layer is the suggestion layer. This is the heart of it. Listen for modal verbs like might, could, and may. Listen for question structures like, have you ever thought about? Or, do you think you might? Listen for phrases like, it might be worth, or it could be helpful, or you might want to. Listen for the word maybe and the word just, which are often tucked around a suggestion to make it softer. The third layer is the closing layer. This is everything that comes after the suggestion. Listen for phrases that hand authority back to the listener. But you know best. Just a thought. It's just one perspective. Whatever works for you. These closing phrases confirm that a suggestion was made and signal that it's now been fully offered with no strings attached. When you listen with all three layers in mind, you catch the full shape of an indirect suggestion. Not just the individual phrase in the middle, but the whole arc of it. And that's when you really understand what's happening in a conversation. Not just the words, the intention, the care, the human connection underneath the language. Let me now give you some additional examples of each layer so you can really hear what I mean. Warm-up layer phrases include things like, I don't know if this is relevant, but, or, I was thinking about something recently, or, this might be totally off topic, but, or, you know, something similar happened to a friend of mine, or, I read something interesting about this the other day. When you hear any of these kinds of openers, perk your ears up. Something is coming. A thought is on its way. Stay tuned. Middle suggestion layer phrases include, have you ever considered? What if you? It might be worth. You might find it helpful to. Could it be that? Have you thought about maybe? I wonder if it would help to. Do you think it would be worth? These are your core signals. These are the engines of indirect suggestion in English. Memorize how they sound. Let them become familiar to your ears, not just your eyes reading them off a page. Closing layer phrases include, "But what do I know?" Just something to think about. You'll figure out what's right for you. It's just one way to look at it. Feel free to ignore me. But that's just me. It's probably not for everyone. Worth a thought anyway. When you hear these, the suggestion is complete. The speaker has stepped back. The ball is now in your court. Practice listening for all three layers together, and indirect suggestions will go from being confusing to being completely transparent to you. You'll hear the whole shape of them, and once you can hear the shape, you can follow the meaning effortlessly. Now let's go back to our big final practice scene. But before I do, I want to say something directly to you, because I think it matters. Learning a language is one of the most vulnerable things a person can do. You're taking your thoughts, your feelings, your whole sense of self, and you're trying to express them in a new system, a new code, one that doesn't always behave the way you expect it to. That takes courage. It takes persistence. It takes a willingness to feel confused and keep going anyway. And if you are here doing this kind of deep listening practice, then you clearly have all of those things in abundance. So I just want to say, keep going. Even when it feels hard. Even when a conversation goes by too fast and you only caught half of it. Your brain is building new patterns every single time you listen. Trust the process. This scene is a little longer and a little more complex. It involves three people, which means there's a social dynamic happening on top of the suggestions themselves. This is closer to what real conversation actually feels like. Sam and Rachel are best friends who both work in tech. Their mutual friend Nadia has recently been offered a promotion at her company, but it would require her to move to a different city. She's not sure what to do. She meets Sam and Rachel for coffee and shares the news. She's clearly torn. Nadia says, "It's a great opportunity. I know it is, but I've built everything here. My flat, my friends, my whole life. And I don't know. I feel stuck." Sam says, "Oh, Nadia, that is a lot to hold. I can see why you're torn. You know, for what it's worth, I was reading something a while ago about how people tend to regret the things they didn't try more than the things they did. I'm not saying that's right for you. It stuck with me. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it might be worth at least imagining yourself in that new city, you know? Like, picture it properly. See how it feels." Rachel says, "I think that's a really good point. And Nadia, I was just going to say, have you maybe thought about asking for a trial period? Like, some companies are flexible about that. You could try it for 3 or 6 months and see. I don't know if your company does that, but it might be worth a conversation." Nadia says, "Oh, wow, I hadn't even thought about a trial period. That's actually really interesting." Rachel says, "Right. I mean, I might be completely off base, but I just thought, you know, it's worth asking. You have nothing to lose by asking." Now let's take a breath and look at what happened there. Sam started with empathy, which is incredibly important before any indirect suggestion. That is a lot to hold. I can see why you're torn. He made Nadia feel understood before he said anything else. That's how humans connect. And in English, that emotional warm-up before a suggestion is very common and very natural. Then Sam shared something he'd read. Not advice from his own head. Something external. Something from a book or article. I was reading something a while ago. This is a very clever way of making a suggestion feel less personal. It's not Sam telling Nadia what to do. It's Sam sharing a broader idea from the world. Much less pressure. I'm not saying that's right for you. He's explicitly stepping back from applying the idea to Nadia. He's saying, this is general. I'm not prescribing it for your situation. But of course, by introducing it, he is gently pointing Nadia toward that idea. That's the beauty of indirect suggestions. They can point very clearly, while technically keeping a lot of distance. It might be worth at least imagining yourself in that new city. And then the actual suggestion, soft as ever. It might be worth. And even what he's suggesting is low commitment, just imagining, just picturing, not deciding, not going, just thinking it through, small, gentle, possible steps. Then Rachel came in. I was just going to say, just, again, that small, minimizing, softening word, doing its quiet work. Have you maybe thought about asking for a trial period? Question form, with maybe inside it. That's double softening. Have you thought about already soft? Maybe even softer. Together they make the suggestion feel very light. I don't know if your company does that. Rachel is immediately acknowledging uncertainty. She's not assuming. She's leaving lots of room for the suggestion to be irrelevant or inapplicable. That's respectful. It tells Nadia, this might not even apply to you. I know that. I'm just floating an idea. But it might be worth a conversation. And there it is. Might be worth. We've heard this phrase today already, and here it is again in a completely natural conversational context. Because this is a phrase that real people use. Often. And then later. I might be completely off base. Rachel is actually undermining her own suggestion, kind of. She's saying, I could be wrong. This might not work. Which is again incredibly human and humble and true to how people actually speak when they care about someone and don't want to push too hard. But I just thought, you know, it's worth asking. You have nothing to lose by asking. And then the gentle closing. Low risk, easy, just worth the conversation. No pressure at all. By the end of that exchange, Nadia has received 2 genuine, thoughtful suggestions. Both of them were wrapped in warmth and humility. Neither of them felt like commands, and Nadia responded with interest and openness, because she was never made to feel pressured. That's the power of indirect suggestion done well. And here's what I love about that little scene. If you were a beginner English listener, you might have heard all of that and thought, oh, they were just chatting, just being supportive. You might have missed the actual suggestions entirely, but now, with the training we've done together today, you caught every single one. You heard the signals, you understood the patterns. That is real growth. That is your ears getting sharper. So, as we come toward the end of today's episode, I want to give you a challenge, a listening challenge that you can do this week, and it will seriously accelerate your progress. Every day this week, whether you're watching a TV show in English, listening to a podcast, having a conversation with someone, or watching YouTube, I want you to catch at least one indirect suggestion. Just one. Write it down. Write the exact phrase you heard, and write what you think the speaker was actually suggesting. Try to identify at least one signal phrase that they used. Was it, "Have you ever thought about?" Was it might be worth? Was it, "I was just wondering"? Was it, "What if you"? Was it, "You might want to think about"? Write it down. Keep a little notebook or a note on your phone. By the end of the week, you'll have at least 7 examples from real English that you caught yourself. And those are worth more than any grammar textbook page, I promise you that. Real language that you caught yourself, in real situations, with real speakers, is the kind of language that sticks. It becomes part of your understanding of English in a deep way, not just a surface-level way. And that's what English in Fluency is all about. Going deeper, getting better, feeling more confident every single time you listen. Now, before I let you go, I want to do one final summary of the key indirect suggestion phrases we've covered today, because I want you to leave with them very clear in your mind. Not as a list you memorize and forget, but as living phrases you now know you'll encounter in the wild. So, if someone says, "Have you ever thought about?" they're making a suggestion disguised as a question. The answer isn't really what matters. What matters is the idea inside the question. If someone says, "It might be worth," they're pointing you toward something they think would benefit you, but they're keeping it gentle with the word might. If someone says, "I was just wondering," they're about to share a thought or idea they'd like you to consider, and the word just signals that they're being humble about it. If someone says, "What if you," they're introducing a possibility, a hypothetical, an idea worth exploring together. If someone says, "You might want to think about," they're nudging you toward a specific consideration, without telling you what to conclude. If someone says, "I don't know, but," they're about to share a thought, and they're softening it in advance so it doesn't feel too forceful. And if someone says, "Just a thought," or "It's just one perspective," or "You know better than I do," they're wrapping up a suggestion in a way that gives you all the control. They're saying, "The final decision is yours, and I respect that." When you hear these phrases, lean in, because what follows is something worth paying attention to. Someone is trying to help you, guide you, or share something with you. They're just doing it in the most human, respectful way they can. And that, my friends, is English as it's actually lived. Not in textbooks, not in formal exercises, in cafes, in offices, in family kitchens, in coffee shops between friends who care about each other. That's where real English lives, and you are getting closer to it every single day. Now, I want to spend a moment talking about something I hear from learners often, and it goes something like this. "Alex, I can understand indirect suggestions when someone explains them to me the way you just did. But in a real conversation, everything is moving so fast. How do I catch these things in real time?" That is such an honest and valid question, and I want to give you a real answer, not a vague one. The first thing I want to say is, this is normal. When you're developing a new listening skill in any language, there's always a gap between what you understand when you're in a calm, focused mode like right now, and what you catch when you're inside a fast, live conversation. That gap is normal. It's not a sign that you're failing. It's just a sign that you're still developing. The second thing I want to say is, real-time catching comes with time and repetition. Every time you listen to an episode like this one, every time you notice an indirect suggestion in a film or a podcast, Your brain is logging it, filing it away, building the pattern a little deeper. And one day, and this day does come, you'll be in a conversation and you'll hear someone say, "It might be worth," and something will click in your brain automatically. Not because you thought about it, but because your ears recognized it. That's fluency. That's what we're building toward. The third thing is, it's okay to not catch everything in real time. Fluency doesn't mean understanding 100% of everything 100% of the time. Even native speakers miss things. Even native speakers say, "Sorry, what did you mean by that?" It's okay. The goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. Gradual, steady, real progress. Let me also give you one more very practical strategy. When you're in a conversation and you think an indirect suggestion might have been made, but you're not completely sure, you can ask a gentle clarifying question. Something like, "Are you suggesting I try that?" Or, "Did you mean I should look into that?" Or even just, "So, would you recommend it?" A native speaker will never be offended by that. In fact, they'll usually be relieved, because it means you were listening carefully enough to notice that they were pointing towards something. And here's a lovely side effect of doing that. It actually continues the conversation in a warm way. It signals that you were paying attention. It opens a space for the speaker to say more, and it makes the interaction feel collaborative rather than one-sided. So clarifying is not a weakness. It's a very socially intelligent move. One more thing I want to add before we go into our final summary, and this is something that I feel really passionately about. I want you to think about the difference between passive listening and active listening, because they are not the same thing, and only one of them will make you genuinely fluent. Passive listening is when English is on in the background, the TV is on, a podcast is playing, but you're half paying attention. Your brain is registering sounds, maybe picking up the odd word, but it's not deeply engaged. Passive listening has some value. It builds familiarity with the sounds and rhythm of English. But it's slow. It's inefficient. Active listening is what you're doing right now. You're fully present. You're thinking about what you're hearing. You're connecting new information to things you already know. You're noticing patterns, feeling for meaning, building understanding in real time. Active listening is how you go from understanding the gist to understanding the nuance, from following the story to catching the subtext, from hearing the words to feeling the meaning. Every episode of English in Fluency is designed for active listening. That's why I break things down. That's why I repeat and revisit. That's why I give you conversations and then analyze them with you, rather than just playing audio and leaving you to figure it out. Because active, guided listening is the fastest, most effective way to build the kind of fluency that actually helps you in real life. So when you listen to this episode again, and I do encourage you to listen at least twice, go actively. Try to catch things you missed the first time. Try to hear the signals earlier. Try to feel the shape of the indirect suggestion even before the actual suggestion phrase arrives. That second listen, that active second pass, that's where a huge amount of learning happens. All right, let me now also say something about using these phrases yourself. Because today has been a listening episode, but I know many of you also want to speak English more naturally, and indirect suggestions are a huge part of that. If you want to start using these phrases in your own speech, start small. Pick one phrase, just one, and try to use it once today. Maybe, "It might be worth," or "Have you thought about?" Use it in a message to a friend, or in a conversation, or even just say it out loud to yourself a few times to get comfortable with how it feels in your mouth. You don't need to master all of them at once. Language learning is not a race. One step at a time is exactly the right speed. And as you start using these phrases, pay attention to how people respond. I think you'll find that when you give advice or suggestions using softer, more indirect language, people receive it much more warmly. They feel respected. They feel heard. And the conversation stays open and comfortable rather than shutting down into defensiveness. That is a real, tangible gift you can give to the people you communicate with, in English and beyond. I am so proud of you for spending this time with me today. Honestly, not every person who wants to learn English actually commits to deep listening practice like this. You did. And that says something really good about you and your goals. Let me share one final thought before I let you go. Something I've noticed after years of working with English learners at this level. The learners who make the biggest, most noticeable leaps in fluency are almost never the ones who study the hardest in a rigid, textbook sense. They're the ones who stay curious, the ones who wonder, why did that person say it that way? The ones who notice something unexpected in a conversation and feel interested rather than frustrated by it. The ones who treat language as a living thing to explore, not a fixed system to memorize. Curiosity is your most powerful tool as a language learner. And what you've been doing today, listening closely, asking why, looking for patterns, noticing the human intention behind the language, that is curiosity in action. That is the thing that will carry you forward, not just to B1, but beyond it. To the point where English feels natural, not foreign, where understanding happens without effort, where you feel at home in the language. Keep that curiosity alive. Bring it to every conversation, every film, every podcast episode, every English song you hear on the radio. Ask yourself, what did they mean by that? How did they say that? Why did they choose those words? These questions are the engine of your growth. Now, before the very final goodbye, I want to give you something extra practical to take with you. A set of mini scenarios. Each one is very short and very everyday. And after each one, I want you to ask yourself, is there a suggestion here? And what signals can I identify? I'll walk through each one with you so you can check your own thinking. Mini Scenario 1. Two colleagues are chatting after a long meeting. One says to the other, "That was a lot to get through. You know, I always find it helps to just write down the 3 things I need to do before I leave the room. Stops everything from swirling around in my head." Did you catch a suggestion? Yes. The colleague isn't saying, "You should write a list," but they're sharing a personal habit in a way that clearly implies, "This might help you too." The signal is the phrase, "I always find it helps," combined with the context of a shared stressful experience. It's the kind of suggestion that works through example rather than instruction. Sometimes the most powerful indirect suggestions don't even contain a suggestion phrase at all. They just share an experience and let the listener draw their own conclusion. Mini Scenario 2. A friend is talking to another friend who's been job hunting for several months and is starting to feel disheartened. The friend says, "Honestly, I think you're brilliant, and whoever hires you is going to be so lucky. I don't know. Have you thought about maybe reaching out to people in your network directly? Like, not just applying online, but actually having coffee with people? Sometimes those conversations lead somewhere unexpected. Two signals here. 1. Have you thought about maybe? 2. Sometimes those conversations lead somewhere unexpected, which is a soft way of saying, this approach works. It's evidence without being pushy. And notice how the compliment at the start, I think you're brilliant, sets such a warm emotional tone that the suggestion lands as encouragement rather than criticism. Mini Scenario 3. A doctor is speaking with a patient who mentions they've been feeling very low on energy. The doctor says, that can have a number of causes, and we'll look into it properly. It might be worth keeping a little diary of how you're sleeping over the next week or two. Just noting when you go to bed, when you wake up, whether you feel rested. It can give us really useful information. The signal. It might be worth. The suggestion is to keep a sleep diary. It's framed as information gathering rather than a lifestyle change, which makes it feel manageable and low pressure. And just noting makes it sound easy, not burdensome. In professional settings like medical ones, indirect suggestions are used very deliberately to make patients feel empowered rather than told off. Mini Scenario 4. Two housemates are tidying up together. One says to the other, I was thinking, and tell me if this is a rubbish idea, but what if we tried having a bit of a house rule about dishes? Like, everyone does theirs before bed. I feel like it might make mornings less stressful. Lots of signals here. I was thinking, as a warm opener. Tell me if this is a rubbish idea, as a preemptive permission to disagree. What if we tried, as a hypothetical framing? And I feel like it might, as subjective, uncertain language. That's 4 signals in one short suggestion. And the whole thing feels collaborative, like they're solving a problem together, not like one person is lecturing the other. Those 4 mini scenarios give you a sense of how naturally and how often indirect suggestions appear in everyday English. And now that you've spent this whole episode training your ears, I genuinely believe you'll start catching them everywhere. That's not me being encouraging for the sake of it. That's just how the brain works. Once you've been shown a pattern clearly, you start seeing it. Like when you learn a new word and then suddenly hear it everywhere the same week. The word was always there, you just weren't tuned to it yet. Now you are. I'm Alex, and this is English in Fluency. Thank you so much for listening today. If this episode helped you, even a little bit, please consider leaving a comment below and telling me which indirect suggestion phrase you'll be listening for from now on. Your comments genuinely matter to me, and they help more learners find this channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We have new episodes every week, all designed to help you hear English the way it's really spoken by real people in real life. Keep practicing, keep showing up, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.